You're listening to Blue Collar, White Coat, the only podcast telling the real stories of the people powering science. Okay, and so what? These are some of the toughest questions scientists will get from people whose support they rely on, especially when they're trying to make the case for funding or policy change on Capitol Hill. And given the interesting political moment we are living through, episode 9 could not have arrived at a better time. In my conversation with Robin Garcia, a former federal worker herself, now a professional science communications trainer, you'll learn how she works directly with scientists and STEM advocates to help them cut through the noise and actually connect with policymakers. Because we have some international listeners, hi, here's a little context. The saying goes that Congress holds the power of the purse, meaning out of the 3 branches of our government, the legislative branch, aka Congress, determines the country's budget each year. In other words, how our tax dollars are spent. It's a big deal. Maybe you've heard something about it on the news recently? But before they were members of Congress, 100 U.S. senators and 435 U.S. representatives were private citizens. Some may have come from money or hold law degrees, but many are former school teachers, farmers, and business owners. According to my quick internet search while writing this intro, out of that total 535 legislators, there are currently 9 engineers, 5 scientists with backgrounds in physics, chemistry, and geology, 4 physicians, and a handful of folks with degrees in fields like dentistry and general biology. Now, this is not me insinuating that all Congress people should have PhDs in hard science, but when it comes to how the US government determines what gets funded or passed into law, whether that's research, investments in new infrastructure, defense technology, or protections for natural resources, all of it depends on how well the people in those chambers on Capitol Hill understand what it is they are voting to fund. Or not fund, as the case may be. Enter Robin and the amazing professionals at Compass Science Communication, who work directly with scientists, researchers, and other STEM advocates to train them with the skills they need to get through to busy congresspeople and their staffers. Whether it's studies focused on women's health or the effects of climate change on low-income communities, why certain pesticides should be kept off crops, or why some vaccines should be mandatory. These topics require congresspeople to have an appreciation for data, reliable sources, and scientific concepts, at a very basic level at least. In this episode, Robin will break down some of the ways she and her colleagues are working to ensure the scientists and science-based policy advocates on Capitol Hill are making sure that happens. Speaking of advocating, have you hit that subscribe button yet? Or written a review for us on your podcast platform of choice? If so, thank you. It really does help more people discover these stories and supports the work that we're doing here. Okay, that's enough from me. Now it's time to hear from Robin Garcia, professional science communications trainer. Robin, I'm so excited to A, see you after a lot of years, and B, have you on Blue Collar, White Coat. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
So I guess we should fill in listeners on our lore. So you were an intern for, I believe, at the time it was called like the Education and Outreach Department at the National Aquarium in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And I was a weekend education aide. So we crossed paths. I feel like you made programs that I ended up giving. I'm not quite sure. What did you do there? What was that summer all about?
Yeah. So this was the summer between my sophomore and junior year at the University of Miami. And so that summer, I'm actually from DC. So I was literally waking up at like 4 or 5 a.m. to get ready, take the MARC train up to Baltimore, to be at the aquarium in time. If anyone has gone to an aquarium or a zoo, a museum, any sort of educational institution like that and you have people with carts with things that you can touch and they can talk to you about what's on the cart or what's in the exhibit. That was me for a whole summer.
And for anyone who's not from the Baltimore, DC, nightmarish metro area, yeah, it's you would think public transit between two cities that are like 40 miles apart or something like that wouldn't be a big deal, and you'd be wrong. But yeah, so anyway. So, talk a little bit about how you got into marine science and interested in the ocean in the first place.
Yeah. So, as well, a lot of feelings have changed about parks like SeaWorld. But I did, in fact, used to say that Shamu showed me the light.
I love that. Oh.
So I've always been a very science-oriented kid. I was the kid that, fell in love with dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist. But I think I was 9 when we took a trip to San Diego. So that was my first visit to SeaWorld. And as happens with a lot of kids, the ocean life just captivated me. And I made the switch from dinosaurs to dolphins and whales and somehow never lost that interest.
Yeah, so then you ended up going to U Miami, which is a known like marine science kind of like institution.
Yeah. Yes. So I got to high school and what I knew at that time was I wanted to study marine science and I wanted to be somewhere warm. So, started doing research, landed on Miami, and very fortunately was accepted there. And so I have an undergraduate degree in technically marine science and biology. In that undergraduate program, you technically have a major in marine science and then you're also double majoring in another one of the kind of basic sciences. So I was technically double majoring in 2 sciences. And fun fact, took enough chemistry classes that I was like, let's just throw in a minor while we're at it. I
Whoa.
I already have the credits, so yeah, I also have a chemistry minor.
That's like, okay, so you're the first one to break with tradition so far. That everyone that I've interviewed has specifically named organic chemistry as an abuser, as a as a derailment point for
But
whatever it
I
was
didn't
they
say I didn't say it was not an abuser, I just had to take it, and I was like, "I'm here, I might as well."
there you go.
Yes, so after Miami, I continued to get my master's degree in marine biology at the College of Charleston.
So you talked about going pretty much from grade school to undergrad to your master's program. Did you have jobs throughout then?
So, yeah, so I had a couple of breaks where I was doing office work, and kind of the further I got along, I did obviously the summer at the aquarium, and the next summer I did an internship. I'm trying to think what REU stands for, Research Experience for Undergraduates. I through the National Science Foundation. So these are summer internships and they're specifically designed to bring in, people who otherwise might not have the opportunity to do research internships for financial reasons or things like that, because there is a pretty decent stipend that comes with it. So I did that next summer an REU actually at the College of Charleston. So that's where I ended up spending that summer doing marine physiology research, blue crab physiology.
That's cool. Oh my gosh.
Yes. So if, oh Lord, this might not work depending on how young the listeners are, but if anyone remembers however many decade plus ago, all this hullabaloo about what are we doing putting shrimp on treadmill, like this is where we're spending all our federal dollars. I mean, I was putting crabs on treadmill, but that's what I was doing.
Forgot about that.
Yes.
But it's always something, right? Like now it's like, what's the thing they were talking about now? Turning mice transgender or something, which
Oh,
is not
yes.
true, which is not what's happening at all. But there's always some like they catch a snippet And we'll talk about, managing policymakers here in a little bit, but they'll catch a snippet of something and they'll just run with it. Like, oh
Absolutely.
my gosh.
Yes. So yeah, I had crabs on a treadmill. By the way, why would you do that? If you are trying to measure metabolic rates and, crustaceans don't exactly listen to you. You can't just
No,
say like, go
no.
exert yourself. You have to make them do it. So you put them on a treadmill.
Um,
Yeah.
okay, so why are we studying the metabolism of crabs? We need to know how they burn calories, how they process food, and like how
Yeah.
like
So I was specifically looking at whether their metabolism changes with environmental changes.
mm, yeah.
So you would kind of take blood samples of crabs kind of working, exerting themselves under normal water circumstances, and then doing the same thing if you drop the oxygen,
Mm,
which already happens a fair amount in estuaries where you find blue crabs. Obviously is happening more so with environmental changes, and seeing, what those changes look like and how that could be affecting them in their habitats.
especially a moneymaker like a blue crab
Yes.
for the East Coast, especially
Yep.
the Chesapeake Bay, Baltimore, Maryland, Virginia, DC.
So had that internship, um, which helped me get into the program there. Um, So in grad school, you can get an assistantship. So you're getting paid to do whether it's a teaching assistantship. So if you're an undergrad and you have TAs, that's what they are, graduate students that are being paid to help out with an undergraduate class. So in my program, everybody gets a teaching assistantship the first year. So I was leading undergraduate labs. I have feelings about
I
that.
was gonna say, how did that go? My goodness.
So, to make a long story short, the feelings I have about teaching assistantships is that there is not enough energy put into teaching you how to teach. That is not the same thing as knowing the science. Those are two very different skills. And boy, did I have a rough time just,
Man.
having had this hard science background for so many years and then being like, "Yeah, now go teach." And I'm like,
People?
what?"
Humans?
Right?
Like, what?
Humans, early
Oh.
adult humans that ugh.
Well, and you weren't that much older than them at the time,
Yeah.
so they like
I'm
I think anyone who's ever stood in front of a group of teenagers can say that if you show weakness, they will smell
exactly.
the blood in the water.
Yes, I'm only 4 years older than them, and I'm supposed to be, teaching them basic biology. I might not have even understood the lab myself. So those are the feelings I have. That's part of a bigger issue of, being a
I
good scientist and being a good teacher are
I
not
was just
the same
gonna say
things.
that we should talk more about that because that is a theme that I have seen over and over again in my career with
Yes.
with science folks. So and it's not accusatory, it's just an observation, right?
Exactly. You haven't been taught the skills. And because in the science realm, a lot of placement is put on being a good scientist. And yes, that's awesome. That's not the same thing as knowing how to instill that information into someone else. So I'll leave the TA there. It was good in a lot of ways, also rough. But then I did end up in a lab with a grant, figuring out how low oxygen and increased carbon dioxide affects early life stages in clams and oysters. So that little larva phase and that little juvenile phase, like
Mhm.
right when they land and they start actually looking like clams and oysters, just very, very teeny. So how does lower oxygen and higher carbon dioxide in the water affect those stages?
Their development,
Yeah.
basically,
Yep.
because if they're growing up in it'd be the same if a kid is growing up in a house with no windows or a city full of smog, what are the implications? Is it gonna affect
Yeah.
how they're able to pay attention in school? Like, there's a lot of,
Mhm. I love that comparison. That was very good.
yeah. Thank you, thank you. It's almost like it's my job, you know?
Right?
But, it's I think it's great to talk about that, though, because I think people are pretty familiar with that kinda study. We've come so far and, I remember growing up and ADHD was, like, getting handed out like candy in terms of
Yep.
diagnoses, but now that we're a few years removed, it's like, "Oh, lead paint." Oh, like, all these environmental factors that, like it's not like somebody holds up a sign like, "Hey, this is happening right now and you're absorbing it."
Mhm.
It's only because folks like you are like, "Hey, wait a minute, let's go back and look at that and let's study and
Yeah.
see what these effects really are." And in this case, it's not just for the food. For yes, we like to eat clams and
Mhm.
oysters and crabs and things like that. But also, these animals are filter feeders. They're keeping the waterways clean. They're helping prevent erosion in some cases. With oyster. What are they called again?
Oyster reefs.
Yeah, yeah, the big structures. So,
Yes.
and there's a lot of effort right now up and down the East Coast to restore those.
So that was my research, and I was getting paid to do that. And then I hit the point in grad school where I was just writing my thesis. Um, and, kind of obviously needed money to keep living while just
Yep.
writing. Um, so I actually ended up um here in Charleston. I've moved back to Charleston since. We have Charleston County Park and Recreation Commission. So
Yeah.
yeah, controls all the parks in the county, stuff like that. I ended up landing a job as an environmental educator with um, CCPRC. So I did that for a summer, and that was so much fun. Getting kind of out into the parks. We have a lot of beach parks. So getting out onto the beach with school groups and, teaching them beach ecology and all of that stuff. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And so post grad school, obviously just trying to find a job related to my field. So I happened to end up with a contract position at the National Institutes of Health doing animal husbandry. This entailed the animals that are used for medical research, kind of taking care of them. I specifically was caring for zebrafish.
Okay, so aquatic stuff. Because the first episode, we actually talked to my friend Rashim, and he actually oversees the teams that take care of rodents at another research facility. And just for the listener, just like those rodents that live to be maybe 2 or 3 years old and reproduce, like there's a reason like rabbits kind of
Yeah.
euphemism exists. And it's because they can reproduce very quickly and have a lot of babies. And so zebrafish are kind of the mouse, would you say, of the
Yep.
aquatic world, where that's the same thing that you can study a lot of them at once. They reproduce very quickly, so you can look at the effects of say pollution on one generation and then several generations after it, how it gets passed
Mhm.
down within a year or two of human life, rather than trying to do these same studies um, on humans, which it's like, your scientist has to be like 10 when he starts in
Right.
order to get good data by the time he's 50 or 60. So, yeah, so I just wanted to like interject and talk about that real quick.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah. Yeah, yes. So, very true. Zebrafish are kind of the aquatic mouse. Yeah. So I did that for a year and a half, and it was at that point that I kind of started thinking like, I don't know that research is going to work for me long term because we all have our motivations and you kind of need those moments of like, aha, like I did it. Yes. Those are fairly few and far in between in science, in my experience. Those moments where like, "Oh my gosh, this test worked beautifully. I have this beautiful data." Then, getting a paper accepted into a journal, are all great feelings, but are fairly few and far in between. I just hit a point where I was like, "I don't think I can do that long term. That is not going to bring me joy long term." It does for plenty of people, and thank goodness for that.
It's not glamorous the way that the media portrays it. And, the
Yes.
scientist that does break through, that is, got their own TED Talk, whatever, like they also put this work in most of the time or had a team doing it for
Yeah.
them. It's this monotony and thankless work and long hours and with the added, burden of student debt on top of that most of the time,
Yes.
the chances of being on some paper that makes it into, the mainstream media is really, really rare. So
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of people burn out of it. A lot of people burn out of research.
So, I'm suddenly sitting here thinking, well, crap, what do I do then? I had, this experience with the parks, with the aquarium. I actually, this is going to be funny, in high school did a summer with the aquarium in DC.
Oh man,
So,
throwback.
right in listeners, in the basement of the Department of Commerce building in downtown DC used to live a little aquarium
Once upon a time.
once upon a time. But I just suddenly had this like clicking moment of I have always enjoyed talking to people about science. Like, maybe let me look into what that entails. So, I kind of landed on this concept of science communication, like being the person to communicate about science with um usually the see, I'm about to say the public, even though in my current job we're like general public is never your audience.
No, no.
Non-experts, let's say that.
I love that. Okay, I love that. They said Publix in my program in Scotland, and their argument was there's not just one public, there's
I
subsects
like
of different,
that.
right? But I also like non-experts because there's different degrees of non-experts too. You can have a chemist who's not an expert in material science but needs to
Yes.
review a paper for someone. You can have a politician who, was a teacher before they got in, so they might have a little science, but they're not an expert in
Mhm.
defense, biodefense or anything like that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Non-experts.
So I was like, okay, so all of my background experience has been in research. How in the world do I pivot to communication? So I started volunteering with a group, DC Eco Women. And so I was doing this communications work with them. But in that time, um, I was one, able to rack up enough of a communication portfolio, and two, had gotten pretty good at speaking to how my research background could be helpful in such a role. There's a argument to be made about, hey, I come from a hard science background, so I can be that bridge. I understand how the scientist functions, what kind of gets them going through the day, and can one help them translate it into layperson language, and two also go back to them and say, this is why it's important that, people understand what you do.
Absolutely.
Your work cannot continue in this silo of, academic journals and this, that, and the other.
Right. It's hard when you work that hard and you're, maybe by yourself a lot of the time or just with your like little team and like listening to your educational journey, like you had to be laser focused on school, on your
Yep.
area, on your experience in order to get on to the next step. So it's really hard for folks sometimes when they get into a space where they need to communicate with non-experts to be like, what do you mean not everybody cares about this species of freshwater fish?
Yep.
And that's not a knock on them. Like I said, look at the process they had to
Mhm.
get to where they are. So yeah, having your background really gives you that appreciation for like, hey, I know where you're coming from. I understand, but we got to zoom out here a little bit and I'm going to show
Yes.
you how.
Yeah, exactly. So I was able to get my first specifically science communication job, and this was as a communication specialist for the National Sea Grant program. Yeah, so I actually ended up at NOAA as a contractor for 6 years.
Wow, that's
Uh,
amazing. Also, I wanted to make sure us government people, darn it, and our acronyms. NOAA, tell us what NOAA stands for real quick, and then
yes,
I want to
NOAA
talk
is
about.
the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
as a
Yeah.
contractor, like, you are kind of beholden to whatever Congress and the party in power
Mhm.
decides. Well, there's an election coming up, and if so and so gets in and decides they don't want to fund this anymore, like they're or it's they have to compete with each other to get that contract.
Yeah. As you said, administrations have their own priorities. I know we're kind of going through that right now. Congress has the final say on federal agency budgets. So yes, as stressful as a presidential budget coming out is, it's also like, let's take a breath, see what the
Yeah,
House and Senate do,
right.
then maybe start panicking. But
Right. And that's where Congress is different than the executive office, for sure. Encouragement to make the right decision for science.
So I was with Sea Grant and then the Office of Response and Restoration, which I like to call the pollution office. So oil spills, chemical spills, the marine debris program
Mm.
is under response and restoration. And then I finished up with the coral reef conservation program.
Wow.
Yeah. So a pretty amazing 6 years. Lots of traveling that I don't know that people think you would do as like a communicator, watching and capturing the stories of your colleagues, the people on the ground doing their work, what they do with the stakeholders. The trip I just felt so privileged to get to take is the Coral Reef Conservation Program. Holds a jurisdictional meeting every year. And the year I went, we actually ended up going to Palau. So I went to Palau
Wow.
2019.
And that's in the South Pacific?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So we were there to have this U.S. Coral Reef Task Force meeting. So these are all the, yes, dignitaries, agencies from all of these states and territories, and at the federal level, because obviously NOAA's not the only one working, on coral reefs. You got EPA, Fish and Wildlife, I think, DOE, Department of Energy, stuff like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
So they're all coming together, meeting twice a year, actually. So they'll meet once in DC and once in a state or territory to kind of talk about, what everyone's been doing, actually get a chance to see what's happening on the ground. So yeah, so, I'm around these other employees from other federal agencies, from the state agencies, the people on the ground who are doing this work, to protect these ecosystems.
Did that experience of doing those trips and being around dignitaries of different countries and our country and watching science folks interact with those people, did that kind of inform like where you are now?
Yes, seeing that connection with the people on the ground. NOAA, any other federal agency, is not, in fact, an amorphous the man. There are thousands of people doing this work because they believe in the mission, they believe in working towards a greater cause. I promise you, a lot of those people, especially people like engineers, IT people, could probably be making twice as much in the private
Oh my
sector.
gosh. But
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you said that because so for instance, I am in the Bay Area of California. I am less than an hour from Silicon Valley. There is a Google campus shuttle that comes to my neighborhood and picks people up. Like we are in tech central, okay?
Yeah.
And we are in a hotbed, especially right now, of AI startups and even
Mhm.
fusion startups. And so literally anybody at the institution where I work could go, not even a 10-minute drive from their house, probably have a shuttle even pick them up and make sometimes even $100,000 more than they make in the service of the taxpayer, in the service of national security. These folks at NOAA, these folks at national parks, these folks at FDA are kind of taking a hit
Mhm.
compared to what they could be doing out in the world in tech, in, really any like you said, IT folks, like, they could
Mhm.
be making so much more money in the private sector. They're there for a reason, and it's to, save the oceans, or it's to make parks more accessible, or it's to,
Mhm.
get the word out about, safe vaccines or whatever it is. And so I'm really glad that you spoke to that.
Yeah, shoot, biologists as well. You could probably go to a private company and make
Academia
so much.
sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
academia and make so much more money, but you believe in the science, you believe in the good that it can do for the taxpayers, because you technically are, after all, beholden to them. It is
Yeah.
their taxes that are
And people
paying
take that so
for you.
seriously, like the phrase, "stewardship of the taxpayer's dollar,"
Mhm.
or the taxpayer's money. I had never heard that before, and until I was involved with a government contractor, and people are serious as a damn heart attack when they use that
Yep.
phrase, like, they are not kidding. And so that protectiveness of like, hey, we have these resources, we need to use them judiciously, we need to use them wisely, we need to use them in the way that the taxpayers have, entrusted us to do so. So yeah, I guess that actually leads kind of nicely into the next question, which is the kinds of workshops that you do at your job now as a trainer, as a science communications trainer, are the scientists and scientific staff and like research kind of related staff that you're working with there on their own? Or are they there because it's kind of like a box they have to check?
Yeah. So I work for Compass Science Communication to differentiate from many other Compass companies. So we are a nonprofit organization, and we are really focused on, supporting um, people who work in science, because we don't, discriminate solely to scientists. But we work with anyone who works with science to kind of give them the skills necessary to connect with others, to share their work with others, all, for to hopefully serve the benefit of people in nature.
I think a lot of folks may not be familiar with the fact that, like, if you're going to be on the news somewhat regularly, or if there's even a chance that a microphone could get stuck in your face while you're leaving your lab or out in the field doing something, having media training and knowing kind of like how to speak in sound bites, how
Mhm.
to, not go off into a personal, like, a rant about something, how to come off as, informed,
Yes.
maybe polished in some situations, maybe candid in other situations. Like, media training is a big deal, and that's actually like a pretty big part of, I'd say, the science communications industry or field.
Yeah. And I would say there's different levels to that. So we don't do media training in terms of like we're actually gonna practice, put you with, which actually I have done a training like that at NOAA, and where you'd be surprised how daunting that feels to be put in a chair and there's suddenly the brightest light on you and a camera.
The guys with the boom
Yes,
microphone and the like,
and
it's
this
yeah,
was all for practice. There is no clip out there of me actually
yeah.
doing this. Um, but you do actually, you're suddenly like, "Oh my god, how do I look? How am I gonna answer this?" So that extent of media training we do not do. But what we do help our participants with is that practice of what do I want specific people, whether it's if a journalist happens to come up to me, if I'm speaking to a congressional staffer or with a community, what do I want them specifically to walk away with? And how do I develop those messages that I know will stick with them because I'm kind of connecting the dots for them in terms of what I do and what does that mean for them?
How okay, how does what you're doing with, like we were talking about before, shrimp on a treadmill, relate to me as someone who is worried about how I'm gonna get dinner on the table, pick up
Yes,
kids, or fix my car. How does what you're doing relate to me? Why do I care, is how somebody else put it,
right? Yeah, so, even the subject matter experts, you probably have 20 things you're thinking about on your mind, both work and personal related. If someone's coming up to you and talking to you about something that you are not already intimately knowledgeable of, like, why in the world should that person drop everything else they're thinking about to listen to you for
Right.
5 minutes? You
Yep.
have to make that connection for them.
Policymakers, which that super interests me. That was one of the reasons I took the job out here is because it sounded like there'd be a chance for me to be the one that like helped design the PowerPoint or edit the copy on the PowerPoint that then gets showed to Congress about why funding needs to happen for whatever kind of research. So talk a little bit about working with policymakers. Or I guess training science folks to interact with policymakers, maybe.
Yeah. So the way that we kind of make that connection between experts and policymakers, I would say probably the area where Compass really shines is yes, we can talk to you all day about how to interact with policy makers and, the people that work for them, the staffers and what have you. Um, but it's a totally different thing to actually bring those people in and talk to you and interact with you. So we will actually bring in policy experts, people who work in policy. Usually those workshops look like a panel discussion with those experts, opportunity for the participants to ask questions. We actually give them a chance to practice with each other. So usually our participants have done their own practice of developing messages, and we'll put them into breakout groups with an expert and have you share your message and have them give you feedback on how it would be received, what's working well, what could be, further tweaked. Um, and our policy experts, I mean, we're talking people from nonprofits, from, private lobby firms, actual congressional staffers, or federal employees that their specific job is, the congressional liaison between the
Right.
agency
Yeah.
and the Hill.
That's
Those are the
that's an
people,
interesting person to me
yeah,
for sure.
that we're actually bringing in to say, we can yell this till the cows come home, but here's the people who actually do this, who you actually wanna interact with. Let
Yeah.
them tell you,
Tell
usually
you
with
about
this.
like what their day is like.
Yeah,
So
their
like
day is like,
we
what they
can't
do.
have a poster. You can't give us a poster with a million giant words and tiny font. I
Right?
don't have time. I need I guess like a policy brief with like
Yep.
more
I
graphs
I
and
need a
photos and
one-pager.
bullet
I
points.
need you to get to the point, if this was supposed to be a 30-minute meeting and now we've suddenly got a vote to get to, this is suddenly gonna be 10 minutes,
Yes.
um, type of
Yeah.
thing.
It's
Um,
hard. It's like that's why I guess they call it lobbying is like you're literally competing for their attention,
yeah,
their support, their ability to then act as a microphone or a, what's the word I'm looking for? Megaphone
yeah,
in the chamber for your cause, for your research, for whatever it is. And if you're trying to talk to them about the, proverbial shrimp on the treadmill when they have a vote on the table about gun violence, like that that's gonna be tricky no matter who you
yeah,
are.
right? Yes, so we do that, we've done a lot of work with fellowship programs to actually prepare them and kind of calmly hold their hand through actually having policy meetings. So, kind of the same situation of bringing in policy experts, usually not the ones that they want to meet with, to kind of help them through that process.
So that do you mean, like, so that there's a little, like, this isn't preaching to the choir. This is, like, you're kind of fighting for someone's attention, and they're actively telling you, like, "I don't care. This isn't something that matters to
Yeah,
me,"
yeah.
or wow.
And even, the little tips that honestly I don't think any of us would think about unless we do this work a lot. Things of like, how to do the research of who you should actually be talking to. It's not just anyone, on the Hill, or even the fact that it doesn't have to be someone on the Hill to talk to. Depending on what you're doing, you might actually should be talking to someone at a federal agency, someone at a nonprofit might actually be the better person for you to talk to. Even to the things like the contact form on your senator's website. No one's reading that. I'm sorry.
Goes nowhere. It goes
That
into
goes
the
nowhere.
void.
Take the extra 10 minutes to do the research to find someone's actual human being's email.
Right. Yeah.
That is where someone will very likely actually respond to you
So
and you can get a meeting set
super
up.
like specific details like that. That's really and it's
Yeah, that
different
I
for
mean,
each policymaker sometimes too. So
yes,
like or level of government, I guess.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, so
That's
we
intense.
help, fellows through all of
Like
that.
navigating that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, with other people just giving them the opportunity to be in the room with policy experts. I personally do not do this, but, colleagues of mine also do, what we call strategic engagement, so kinda creating the spaces for that actual interaction to occur, whether it's, a roundtable at a conference or like a Hill Day type of situation, creating those spaces for that actual organic interaction to happen.
Interaction for that those conversations to happen. That's cool. So
Yes.
facilitating like kind of like a captive audience scenario, but and one that they're actually engaged in like
Mhm.
conversations, not just like being held hostage
Yeah.
and lectured at, which is
Yes,
like another
exactly.
thing scientists have a predilection for is to lecture and to get to their point the way that they're going to get to their point from A to Z.
Yeah,
You know, that's something in science writing we see a lot where they're like in 1974,
right?
the idea was that, like, no, we need to know what's happening now and why it matters. Like, that's all we need to know. We don't need to have the
And
whole
and that's
research
so
history.
funny because I don't know if this was the case for you, but for me in school coming up, you were taught to write in an active voice. And
Mhm.
then you get into the scientific space where they're like, "No, no, 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 no. We're going to remove you from the writing because it's about the
So
science." And,
yeah.
now I'm doing this work where, like, one of my slides is literally, think of how a peer-reviewed paper is written. You, like, start here, supporting details, your methods, and I'm like, "Real yes, your results, but really your conclusion is where you get into what do those results mean in a grander scheme of things. Unless I literally need your paper to do my work, I'm not getting to the conclusion. Nobody's getting to the conclusion.
Nope.
You literally
Not this
have to
day and age.
you literally have to flip that.
Exactly. I was just gonna say, flip it. Yep.
Yep,
Yep.
you need to start with the result, if you will, why it matters. Then if someone's captivated, then you can start with that supplemental information, but
Right.
if
If
you
they're if
can't get them
they
to
continue the
care.
conversation that, well, what kind of microscope did you use? Then great. They can you can go into those
Exactly,
details, but,
yes.
yeah,
Maybe
that's
follow-up email, something that's not what you're leading with if
right.
you want them to care.
And, like, it's funny because you're working with these crazy smart people, like, super, super intelligent, just, like, solving the world's problems, and it's amazing, and then just sometimes even telling them that and describing it to that way, you can watch their brain explode in their head. Like, they're like, "What do you mean?" Because you're telling them to, like you said, flip it, literally go back on the thing that you have been like,
Yeah,
told to do and taught to do and, trained to do in your sleep your whole adult life. And that's just a one really good example of what I, hope is, I hope people glean from this podcast over and over again, which is that there are no like there are some stupid people in the world, let's be honest, but, like, when it comes to, like, it isn't a contest, first of all, in terms of, like, scientists are smarter than, people that work at a grocery store. Everybody is super smart at things in their life, and they don't know other things, and scientists have that same, "Huh?" face sometimes that we do when, like, the remote doesn't work right or whatever, like, I
right?
have to do my taxes or something like that. People, you know it yeah, I'm trying to think of how to say this, and one of my guests said it better, but, like, we can't look at it as, like, a spectrum of who's
Yeah,
smartest and who's not, you know?
yeah, so something that we teach is, for your messages I should remember, your messages to be simple but not simplistic. We do
Mhm.
not believe in dumbing down science, that's not what we're telling you to do. It's essentially to use a different, more layperson-friendly language, like, I this might be a bad example because some people might think this. I would not hear someone, especially someone that comes from a Spanish-speaking family, hear someone speaking Spanish and assume like, "Oh, they're stupid." They're
No,
they're
right.
just using a different language that I don't understand, so I'm like, "I don't know what's going on." That's all we're asking you to do. Use a different language, drop the jargon that has its place in your lab, at your conferences, but not with this staffer, because this is not what their expertise is in.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and understand that what you're speaking is a language. And there is, a reason to appreciate that and be like, "Wow, this is amazing. You're super smart." All these big words and everything, but appreciate that what you just said. Just because someone can't speak that language, isn't fluent in that language, doesn't mean they can't understand your research, doesn't mean they can't
Mhm.
understand, like, the importance of it and how it relates to them. It just means that you gotta use that exactly what you said. You gotta use that, like, different language,
Yeah.
not talk at them louder and slower, right?
Honestly, we should probably change this because we do a lot of you start up a conversation with someone on public transit, and it never fails that people are looking at us like, "I am not talking to someone
Horrified.
on, like, the metro," and I'm like, "I okay,
Uh,
the idea is just in a place where you don't know this person." I also am not trying to talk to people on the metro, I'm just trying to get home.
right, right,
But the point is you ideally are not gonna try to lecture at them. You're
right,
gonna give them, like, 2 sentences,
right.
and that's it.
Yeah, and that's like I think a lot of people don't realize it surprises a lot of the scientists and SMEs that I work with to know that like I think right now the actual standard is if you're going to write anything that will be consumed by the average American, you have to write it on no greater than like a 6th grade reading level, I think. And so that's like 10 or 11 years old, but we're talking about adults. We're not just talking about kids here. And I want to say that and I want listeners to hear that without an ounce of judgment. It's just where we are and it has no reflection on anyone's intelligence. It's just where we are. If you're working 3 jobs
Yeah,
and you're trying to get dinner on the table, you're not going to be reading Chaucer in your spare time. You're not going to be going for maybe the stuff you and me go for cuz we're nerds on the you're not going to be reading the Scientific
exactly.
American for fun to decompress at night. So they're going with the reading level that either they had all along or that they are at
Or
now.
like, that they just need to get through their day,
They need to fill out job applications. They need to like,
exactly.
read a voting ballot, anything like that. And it needs to, like I said, would it be great if everybody was on a 12th grade or a college level? Sure. What would society look like? I don't know. But at the end of the day, that's not where we are. And we need to
Mhm,
not look down our noses at it or scoff or, whatever else. It's just the way it is. And yeah, like you said, it's not about dumbing it down. It's just making sure that we're speaking that language. That's all it is.
exactly.
How long have you been with Compass?
Compass, actually, as of this month, it's been 4 years.
Wow. I first of all, I just love that something like Compass exists because the
Yes.
reason, and I've said this on a couple episodes already, so I'll try not to be too repetitive, but the reason I went to the UK for my master's is because there was no science communications anything in the States. And now that's changed, and we'll talk about the future in a little bit. But one of the things that struck me about my program in Scotland was we were literally down the street from Parliament, from Scottish Parliament, and in the Parliament building, they have a office for science communicators where if the politician upstairs that's reviewing a bill that they have to vote on at some point doesn't understand the science or needs a term defined or something like that, they can trundle on down to the science communicator office or have one come up to their office. And I feel like Compass and companies like that and nonprofits like that are kind of hopefully fighting the good fight and filling that kind of
Yeah.
role, which is amazing.
Yeah,
Yay, Compass.
thank you. Yeah, and I will note also, that a lot of fellowships also have the goal of filling in that.
Can you talk a little bit about a fellowship? Because that's also like a fairly it's at least new on my radar. I don't remember looking at jobs and seeing fellowship postings as much before, and it seems to be the big niche for science communications for sure.
Yeah. I'm obviously much more familiar with fellowships in the more like ocean science space. So for instance, NOAA has the Canals Marine Policy Fellowship. The National Academies has fellowships, but a lot of these fellowships, the purpose is to take recent graduates or early career scientists and place them in a policy space, whether that's directly on Capitol Hill with a federal agency. And it's meant to be this reciprocal relationship of the fellow getting real world experience, that ideally will down the road lead to a job outside of academia. And these offices are getting a science expert that can provide that
Mm.
expertise that they might be missing because, policy world, a lot of people are coming in with a policy background. But that is not the same thing as, knowing, understanding the latest science and what does that mean. So it's bringing that expertise into their offices and also giving the fellow um, a glimpse into what a career could look like outside of academia.
That's really cool. I hadn't even considered that. So, like, another thing that you listeners who may not be as familiar with the scientific world, academia, whatever, you and me graduated in 2008, 2009-ish, probably. And what we learned in biology isn't probably, they have a whole different textbook, and there has been several iterations of that textbook between you
Right.
and me.
Yes.
Science is not static. Science is not I think this is where a lot of the conflict that we see these days comes up, because scientists are like climate change is a thing, but at the same time they're saying science is changing all the time and we don't know, and da, 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 da. So it is like a little bit complex of an answer, but at the end of the day, science is always changing, and we are fighting to know. I guess we're working towards knowing. So having a fellow come in to be that lifeline to what the science is right now, when everyone running the organization graduated 15, 20,
Yep.
30 years ago, that's really cool. I had never thought of it in that capacity. I'd always thought of it what you talked about in terms of like what the value is for someone like you or me that would apply to it, and or a recent graduate or someone who's still finishing their program or whatever,
Hmm.
why they would apply to it, which is what you just said. It helps you see what the workforce is like, find your niche, where you want to go. You get paid while you're doing it,
Yep.
but you're also a resource for them because you're this lifeline to what's happening now in the
Yes.
field. That's super cool. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So if anyone is in that point in their academic career where you're kind of looking at the next steps, definitely check some of those out. uh,
And they're usually like a year or two,
yeah,
right? Okay.
usually a year or two. So I obviously am most familiar with the Canals Fellowship out of NOAA. So that is a year-long fellowship where you're either a legislative fellow, so working in a personal or committee office in Congress, or an executive fellow, so working in a federal agency. Um, and one thing I'll note, because this was not clear to me when I was of the age in my career to look at this, um, is how vast the concept of science policy can be.
Mm.
I knew of the fellowship, and in my mind, everyone was a legislative fellow who was like on Capitol Hill, which was not what I wanted at that point in my life. Funny enough, I would have knocked someone on the head for that a few years later, but that's besides that.
Yeah.
That was not what I wanted finishing up grad school. And I think NOAA is and Sea Grant are doing a better job of communicating this now, is that it can look like so many different things. Yes, it can look like being down on a hill, but it can also look like, being a program manager. So managing a program in an office. It can look like being the communicator in an office. Um, It can look like being the congressional liaison, so you're the middle person between that agency office and a hill. It can look like so many different things, and that was not something that was clear to me at that time, and I think they're doing a much better job of sharing that breadth of what that fellowship can look like.
That's an interesting segue because the next question I was going to ask is, I have certainly seen this field grow in the States and
Mhm.
change. It used to just be this, you had to get a journalism degree and then choose to start covering science or marine science or conservation. You had to be a biology major or marine bio major that then just started writing and was good at it,
Mhm.
and there wasn't the influencer niche, there wasn't the YouTuber niche, there wasn't, the podcast niche.
Yes.
There wasn't all of these different, very accessible, very regular, everyday people versions of communicating science. It was all through the federal mouthpiece or the think tanks and
Mhm.
not for profits, which especially in DC can be very siloed and very,
Mhm.
shall we say, not ultra aware of what real
Yes.
everyday people actually care about and need. And that's a product of DC sometimes, and it's also a product of just like where things were at the time, right?
Mhm.
And so I was what I wanted to like kind of get your firsthand perspective on is how have you seen the science communications field change and improve and evolve over just your career?
Yeah, so I would mostly say what has changed is the recognition, and I'll caveat this with the fact that I think we still have a ways to go to get to this point. But the recognition is continuing to grow that communication cannot be an afterthought. It cannot it's not sufficient to do the work and then later be like, "Oh, yeah, we should probably, like, do a one-pager on this," right?
Right,
Or,
yeah,
like,
that one
a
intern is kinda good at social
blog
media, can
story.
we just, like, make them do it, you
They're under
know?
the age of
Oh.
20, they know
Yeah.
talk, let them do that. Um,
Right, right.
I think there's much more of a recognition of, "Oh, this needs to be an integrated part of how we do our
Mhm.
work."
Written into the funding, the grant, the
Yeah.
request for funding, like yeah, I talked to another, guest about, their researcher that they were signed on to support in the capacity of photographer and writer, asking them, "Okay, like, what's your daily rate?" And then no, no. What's your daily rate gonna be in 5 years? And I was blown away by that. I was like, first of all, they're thinking to include you at all, and secondly, they're accounting for interest or not interest, inflation, like,
Inflation.
that's incredible, and can they teach a workshop?
Right? Yes. Yeah, so the fact that, groups like Compass are being brought in, like, with, either within the work being done, not after the fact, it's like, while this agency is doing this work or this lab group is doing this work, like, let's do this now and kind of build up our communication skills as we prepare to finish this work and share it. Um, the fact that we're being brought into graduate programs, that there's this recognition of like these students need to finish school with this skill. Yeah, the fact that science communication programs exist now in the US, obviously not a lot, but is
More
growing.
than 5 years ago.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to the point of, the the wealth of science policy programs that
Yep.
exist. Hopefully communication will get to that point. Um, so yeah, overall the notion of like, oh, this has to be part of how we just work day
Baked
to
in.
day.
Baked
Yes.
in. Yeah, I say sometimes, it would be great if my job didn't exist someday. If the scientists came
Right?
out of the gates, like with like you said, okay, at 9 a.m. I have chemistry and at 10 a.m. I have science communication or communication 101 or whatever it is, baked in. And yeah, it's super encouraging to see the colleges and the universities start to pick up on this because I think In 2017, when I was starting to look at programs, it was like Santa Cruz here, which one semester for a 2-year program would have cost me as much as my entire year in Scotland and degree cost me. America. Well, I'll go
Right,
into that at
that's a
some point.
whole other is there an after show where we can be like, "How much debt do I have from school?"
Yeah. Yeah, I think I truly do think I'm gonna do an episode about it because I think that's another point of contention where a lot of folks that didn't go into academia or aren't familiar, with the process see that, the debt forgiveness stuff, and they're like, "Oh, wait a damn minute, like, why do they get to not have an
Mhm.
extra bill every month and I do?" Yeah, so I think that you're right,
I would
100%
say
another
or e
conversation.
I know we keep going off on tangents, but
No, it's okay.
or even just the fact that science financially is there is that financial barrier that I think exacerbates that white collar, blue collar divide because, there are a lot of people like me who did an RU because I was like, I don't have time to volunteer in someone's lab during the school year. Like I have to work a job. I need
Yep,
money.
yep,
So
yep.
things like REUs were definitely lifesavers in terms of having that experience on my resume, but that's
That
still a
also
big
means you
barrier.
have to have good grades, even if it's
Yep.
like you have the means to find a program like that and get into it in order to earn money because you don't have the money to sustain yourself for free while you're working, that you still have to have the academic component. And if you
Mm,
are you're a single parent family household or you're raising yourself in some situations, your
yep.
grades are probably not where they need to be to get into an RU or have exposure to that kind of thing. So yeah, I love that you brought that up. That is one of the big motivators for starting this podcast is to
Mhm.
explain, to folks that don't, they just don't know that science it is for everyone, but there is some fine print in this country, especially in terms
It
of
is for
who.
everyone, but the system as it is set up does not make it so in practice.
Maybe I should have been having folks like answer a question about student debt, so I could put together a montage or something. Maybe season 2, I don't know.
Like,
But
"Season 2, we're back to cry about our debt."
so, I guess like working with all these different stakeholders, as they say, I realize that's jargony in and of itself, but people who have a stake in science and whether or not
Mhm.
it succeeds and, research, working with policymakers, working with school groups, working with science staff. Do you mind if we talk more about that? Because that's really interesting to me. I know we're like almost out of time here, but tell me more about that. Are scientists sometimes
Sure.
prickly?
Well, as we've noted, scientists, especially if you're a career scientist, you've been doing this your whole life, you get very zoned in on your work, and everything else is just kind of like peripheral. Honestly, sometimes it just feels like it's getting in the way. And I found not all scientists, a lot got it, but a lot would often look to me, especially if they weren't in DC, look to me as a communicator in DC being like, "Hey, I just need a quick blurb about what you're doing." Either being like, why are you bothering me? Like, I'm doing my work." Or the quick blurb I wanted is like a whole page of technical information that I'm now having to dig through and be like, again, I'm not the expert, so I'm sitting here like, what does this even mean? Like,
Looking up
I'm now having to
words.
decipher this.
Yep.
And
Yep.
the uphill battle that there sometimes was to get these scientists to understand that how my work was ultimately trying to benefit them, right? Again, we are a federal agency. We are beholden to Congress who has set our budget and ultimately to the taxpayers whose money we are using. They deserve to know how we are using that money. And if you want to keep doing your work with said money, you probably want me to do a good job of showing why you deserve to keep doing that work.
Right. Selling it, for all intents and purposes, as gross as that is, that
Yes.
sounds, that feels, yeah, I feel like oftentimes when I sit down with a scientist or an SME, I have to be like, I am not the crooked media. I am also not a used car salesman.
Yes.
I am here to help you get the word out in a way
Right?
that makes sense to people and helps them see the value of what you're
Mm.
doing.
And that often, like, I'm not asking you for this information, like, because I'm, like, twiddling my thumbs, like, I'm probably getting that ask from somewhere above me. So, like, if you're not doing your part, I'm hearing it from upstairs of, like, "Where's this info?" At least at NOAA, there's a fair amount of, details, so where you kind of go and fill in another role for a few months. And it never failed that if someone came into, the main office to do a detail, they were suddenly like, "Oh, I get it. I get
Like a
why you're."
scientific person getting rotated into like the more admin side of things.
Yeah, but just finally seeing for themselves how DC works and going, "Oh, that's why you're bugging me."
Interesting. I always say like people should be have mandatory like retail work or museums so you can literally
Right?
interact with actual people to see how rude they can be, how distracted they can be, how
Mhm.
uninspired they can be because of life, before you try to make rules for them or whatever.
Yeah,
But yeah, I love that idea to like, yep, it's your mandatory 6 months answering emails and phone calls and
exactly.
interesting. That's super funny. Well, speaking of, the future of Noah and whatever, a lot of things for STEM are scary right now. There's a lot of reduction in force happening. There's a lot of cutting of budgets and threatening of, universities to lose their resources and things like that. So, what are you hopeful about? Because I don't want to dwell in the doom and gloom. I,
Yeah.
I want to know what you're hopeful about and what you're, maybe even looking forward to.
Yeah, I am hopeful of the fact that, I think this experience has really brought everyone together. Um, I mean, I would say the science space and the science communication space is already a very, like, we don't feel very competitive with each other. Everyone's trying to help each other out because we all have this greater goal, and that has just increased, unfortunately, out of the necessity of what we're in right now. But, I just feel so much more of a camaraderie of, for better or for worse, we're all in this together. And what makes me hopeful is I understand, there is a very loud group that does not believe in what we're doing, but that group is much smaller than it seems. It seems fairly big because they're loud and they unfortunately have the mic at the moment, but the vast majority of people, if you actually, if you actually can get a moment to speak with them, obviously everyone is going through their own strife with, inflation and housing issues and what have you. But I would say the vast majority of people are on the same page of like, man, what's happening is horrible and like, how did we get here? We need to do something. Um, I think that makes me very hopeful. I don't obviously don't know in what it will look like when we come out on the other side. But I truly believe there is another side sooner or later that we'll get
I
to.
agree. Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that. That's something that I try to harp on a lot is that especially with the help of AI and social media bots, this group feels insurmountable. It feels like half of the country is really just this against science and saving the planet and cleaning our waterways and whatever. And it's just not true. And
Mhm.
if we go out and talk to each other more face to face, we'll figure that out pretty quick. And if we approach one another with empathy and learn their story and appreciate what they're afraid of because a lot of the times at the end of the day these strong opinions are formed from a place of fear. Well, this has been amazing. I'm glad we could reconnect for the first time in, I don't know, 15 something years, 10 years.
No, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed learning about Robin's journey and how her work experience, both in the lab and out in the world, working with everyday people, make her perfect for the role she's in today. Robin and Compass are doing amazing work, and I feel like there's just so much more to talk about. But I hope, at the very least, our conversation reinforced for you the importance of staying on top of your elected officials. Making calls, writing letters, sending emails, these are all ways of making sure that they know we, as voters and the suppliers of their budget, value and support funding research and passing science-based policy. So I'm just really interested in science in Washington, D.C. and on Capitol Hill. So if that's something you'd like me to cover more in the future, or if you know someone who might make a good interview on this topic, shoot us an email at bluecollarwhitecoatpod@gmail.com. And while I'm at it, you can find us at Blue Collar White Coat Pod, all one word, on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And we're on BlueSky too. You can find us at BCWC Podcast. We have a few more episodes to go, but I'm going to be taking a short break for the rest of November. But when we get back on December 6th, we'll be talking to our first guest that officially qualifies as blue collar, the first of many, I hope. His name is Kyle Luker, and he is a machinist working at a major university here in California. Kyle's career has taken some crazy twists and turns. He was a wildland firefighter. So cool. Really, I just can't wait for you guys to meet him and hear his story. So make sure you don't miss it and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, we have a YouTube too. If you're dying to see how tired I look when I'm interviewing someone in a different time zone, or all the goofy facial expressions I make while making this show, check out our channel at Blue Collar White Coat Pod to see for yourself. Also, shout out to my social media helper, Kira, and my dad for being the first to subscribe on YouTube. Thanks, guys. Okay, that's it for now. I'll see you guys in December. And until next time, keep your safety glasses on and your mind open.